From Croaky here, and we're at the very end of the World Indigenous Suicide Prevention Conference in Perth, Australia. And I'm speaking here with someone whose English name is Jocelyn, but you can introduce yourself far better than I. Would you be so kind to do?
네, 안녕하세요. Dan di hate ni gaso. Anondawa ga ni agatayo ni. My name is Dangoenot di hate, and it means a completed discussion, and it refers to the time when our elders would come together and join their minds together as one to come up with the one decision for our entire people, for the whatever welfare or betterment it was for our people. And I also had told you that I am a member of what is known as the Seneca Nation in English, but Onondawaga means a place of the Great Hills, and that's the Genesee River Valley in upstate New York. My clan is Wolf, and since we are a matrilineal society, my clan is bestowed upon me by my mother and her mothers before her.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for doing an interview. Can you tell me what's brought you here? What was you presented today? What did you want to talk about here?
I presented on the Goswenta, which is a treaty belt that was made between our Haudenosaunee nations of the Mohawk Nation as one of the 6 nations of our Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. And I presented on how that message was a warning of the encroaching settlement in colonialism and assimilation to come. But our elders are so profound in their thinking that they also provided us with the tools for healing in that message as well, for the aftermath that was inevitable that came here with the Europeans.
And could you describe those tools?
As far as the tools is, what the message talks about there's a lot of symbolism in the belt. It's a belt that's made out of quahog shells it's made into a treaty belt, and it has a lot of symbolism in there. It represents 2 vessels traveling side by side, one being of the Ongwa'away, the true people that are of the land of Turtle Island, which is now known as the United States. And then there's the other vessel is that of the Haudenosaunee, the non-native people that came to these lands, and they run parallel to each other. And when 2 vessels are parallel to each other, they are never to intersect each other's path and interfere with each other's determination of their future, and they're also not to try to steer and interfere with the course of the operation of that particular group's vessel. So this is the teachings that they seen when they were coming, and all these people were, the Dutch kept arriving on the shores for the fur trade. They're exploiting a lot of animals in that area at the time. And they were also claiming up all the land. So what happened was that it was inevitable. We couldn't stop the Europeans from coming. But now that all this intergenerational trauma has happened because of the assimilation policies, like the boarding schools in the United States and residential schools in Canada, now we are left in a situation where we need healing. And that message also shows how if we refer back to that message of us being in our own canoe with our own identity, our own teachings and traditions, that is the key to our healing. And I think it's just so profound how our ancestors were able to have a foreshadowing of a warning, but we have a solution to the issues that have happened over the last several hundred years.
And of course we're at the Suicide Prevention Conference. Is suicide a big issue in your community?
In my community, we have had some suicides. It's not nearly as bad as some other Indigenous communities, especially up in like rural Canada, or different poverty stricken areas like the Dakotas. There's a lot of suicide there, but what I find in my community is high-risk behavior and unintentional suicide. I feel that with constant overdoses and overdosing and reckless behavior. So I think that is also an issue that should be looked at as far as suicide goes. As the spectrum of it, many people wouldn't consider an overdose as suicide, but it is very high-risk behavior, knowing that could be the consequence of that behavior.
And have you found good community solutions there?
We're working on it, but there's also a lot of intergenerational trauma, I think, that still exists in a systemic level through our government, our own tribal government, that needs to acknowledge. And I think that's the thing is, we need more education for our own leaders to accept that what we're doing and how we're conducting ourselves with lateral oppression is wrong, and that it comes from a historical place, from a plan that's not of our own. And once we identify and embrace that, it's not until then we can start to truly heal.
You were presenting in a session that also talked about parenting, and especially for so many Indigenous peoples who were removed from family, removed from culture, removed from communities, and of course there were the residential schools. And you talked about, you know, how do you help the next generation? What are your thoughts there?
My thoughts are teaching them self-sufficiency and self-determination, and providing them with all the tools of their identity to feel a belonging in the world somewhere. And I'm finding that young people are having an identity crisis. I think I was having one in my early 20s because I didn't know who I was. I was, you know, as far as my traditional culture, and I was living very reckless, as far as abusing substances. And it wasn't until I started to learn my identity and learn my language, and I got heavily into learning my language employed by our Seneca language program. It was only then that my whole view on the world changed, and my whole lifestyle changed. And I credit it to the worldview that our language and culture gives. So if we could provide that with our children, and teach them that they can provide everything for themselves and not be dependent on an outside entity. So I'm talking about food sovereignty. They talked about, even as far as data sovereignty, birthing our own children and being able to be totally autonomous, as far as medicinal plants and using our own healers. All of these things can take the dependence away from an outside force, and we can start becoming our own self-determining people again.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.